Welcome back to the Investor Professor Podcast. This is Dr. Ryan Peckham, and this is episode 104. On today's episode, we're going to get to the number of companies that reported this past week and kind of shaped the market. That'd be Tesla, Netflix, American Express, United Healthcare. And we'll look at that. We'll look at the market coming up this past week, but we're also going to talk about 0.27%. And what if I told you that applying for a job, you had a 0.27% chance of getting that job? You probably wouldn't think your chances were that good. They're not. But there are some ways to kind of frame that so that you can still have the career and path that you want. So stay tuned for that. Get your mind right, and let's get to work. Well, welcome back to the show, everybody. Appreciate you joining me once again. Let's look over this crazy market. We're right in the middle of earnings season. We got a lot of earnings coming up this week. There's going to be some important ones. Microsoft, Google are going to be some of your most important tech stocks. And then we have the Fed. So the Fed's going to meet this week. Been talking about it a lot. We'll see what they say. There's an expectation that this is going to be the last interest rate hike. I'm not going to make predictions. I'm not really sure, but I would say that we're got to be pretty close to the end of this cycle as far as raising rates is concerned. And I'll talk about that here in a minute when we just talk about some of these company earnings that we had this week. And so the Dow has had 10 days where the Dow Jones has been up. It's the longest streak since 2017. And so that's pretty amazing. We're still not, I've talked to a couple people this week and they're like, man, I'm waiting for the market to go down before I invest. And what a troubling saga that is, right? So when you look at, last year when the market was getting really beat up, you had your chance, and now people, just over and over again, we, sell at the wrong times and we start buying at the wrong times, and it's important to just stay invested, right? To just keep on the path. But that is boring. It doesn't make great YouTube videos to tell people to be consistent, to be steady. It's not emotionally driven. It's not making these bold predictions, but it is the safe, secure way to get wealthy. So anyways, you have the Dow up 10 straight days. We're still not at the highs that we had in 2021. We're still not there. I mean, there's still a way to go to take over those highs from a couple of years ago. So even though we've had a nice recovery, it isn't like we've broken out to new all-time highs or anything like that. There's still a lot of things going on here. And so when you look at some of the companies that reported, I'll highlight Netflix, Tesla, and American Express. It's interesting to see what they see, right? So Tesla, one of the things they ran up into the quarter like a lot of these companies have done. They were down 8 to 10% when they reported numbers, and the numbers were pretty good. Their revenue was up. I mean, their sales are up. A lot of that, they almost got to $300 before they reported earnings. Now they're sitting around $260. So that's a pretty steep drop from where they were just before reporting earnings. And so one of the knocks on them is that their gross margin has shrunk to 9.6%. And so meaning kind of their profit on the cars that they make is 9.6%. And that's because they've, been reducing the price of the vehicles that they're selling. They're doing that to make sure that demand doesn't get hurt. They want to keep the public, buying these automobiles. And so, Elon Musk was on the earnings call, and one of his comments was, I know you're concerned about these gross margins, but it's a very short-term view of our company. And the reason that he says it's a short-term view of the company is because when you think about an iPhone, you think about how valuable is that customer over time to Apple if somebody owns an iPhone. That that customer is worth a ton of money. And it's the same thing for Tesla. They're going to be going to the charging stations. They're going to be getting vehicle maintenance. There's all of these things. And then when as Musk pointed out, they're still working on being able to have cars drive themselves. I don't know how close we are to that, but he's like, we're one software update away from being able to do that. We want as many vehicles out on the road as possible. And so while gross margin is important, sometimes analysts can get very myopic on, very just zoned in on one component. And so you got to kind of pull yourself out and look at the overall picture. And so same thing with Netflix, right? Netflix is looking to change us from password sharing fiends to basically all having our own Netflix account. And that's going to take a while. I mean, they were expected to have 2 million users this quarter, and they got 5 million new users. And so they're looking at the tiers. There's the ad-supported tier. There's the ad-free tier. And by the way, one of the things I thought was interesting on their conference call is that the ad-supported tier is actually much more valuable to them as a company. And that is because not only are you paying a little bit, but advertisers are willing to pay a lot to advertise to you. So there's definitely going to be a push for Netflix to figure out a way to work in that ad-supported tier in the future. I think you're definitely going to see some rollouts on that in order to make them more profitable. And so that's another one. They got beat up after earnings. And so with that being said, you look at the other technology companies that have done so well this year, and we've talked about them over and over again, NVIDIA and Apple and Meta and Google and Amazon. So because of these companies sold off so much after their quarter, there's this, oh man, I gotta sell out before these other ones report, which can sometimes be a dangerous game. And so you saw that this week. You saw a lot of the tech companies pull back. But, when I look at these quarters, I mean, Tesla and Netflix, they're still doing good. They're still doing good. And then we had American Express. They reported good earnings, but the one thing that freaked everybody out is they're actually increasing the amount for loan loss reserves, which is people who can't pay their bill, right? So that's the little cracks you start seeing in the economy. These are the things the Fed's looking for. These are the things the Fed wants to have happen. They want to see, the economy cool off. Well, when you start looking at some of the housing numbers, people not buying as many houses. You look at companies like American Express, some of the banks start putting more money aside for consumers that cannot pay them back. You start seeing a little, you start seeing a little bit of damage, which is what the Fed's looking for. So while it's not good for American Express, analysts are looking at that going, oh man, we might not have as many interest rate hikes because there's going to be some issues when we keep interest rates at this high level for this period of time. So again, who knows? I mean, these companies are reporting what happened over the last 3 months, not to what's going to happen in the 3 months coming up. And so their guidance is important as well. But there is going to be probably some softening the longer that they keep interest rates high. And it looks like they're definitely going to do that. So this week, those are going to be the highlights for you. The Microsoft quarter, the Google quarter, that's going to be very important. One of the things that kind of boded well for NVIDIA is that Elon Musk talked about the supercomputers that he's trying to build, all the things he's trying to do for the Cybertruck. That was the other thing, is when's the Cybertruck going to come out? But he basically said he's buying every single chip he can from NVIDIA as fast as they can make it, right? So when you look at the demand for a company like NVIDIA, I mean, they should, when they report their quarter, and they don't report for a while, it's in August, but you're probably going to see some pretty strong numbers from them. So, I posted about it a little bit this week on Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs reported earnings. Everybody's making a big deal. They're not as profitable as they used to be, and they're not. They're not as profitable as they used to be. But I struggle to make predictions here. But when you look at a company like Goldman Sachs, there is not a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on. There's not a lot of IPOs going on. And so that is their main business, right? You look at Morgan Stanley, they're big on that too. They have more of a consumer trading. Morgan Stanley owns E-Trade. So they have that that consumer presence that Goldman really doesn't have. And so you look at these companies almost yielding a 3% yield. I look at Goldman and Morgan Stanley as one of those opportunities of being paid to wait, right? Being able to be paid to wait for these things to come in, for mergers and merger activity, IPO activity, all of these things to become stronger, and there to really be a demand for that stock or company to be very profitable in the next coming years. So not all of the investments in your portfolio are going to be humming at the same time. And I think that's something that is probably one of the biggest misconceptions when somebody's building a portfolio. I mean, some of the things that you place in your portfolio or some of the things you invest in, you got to think about, this is going to be where I make money in 3 years, not where I make money in 3 months. And so I think in the next 2 to 3 years, Goldman and Morgan Stanley look like very different companies when that activity returns. So speaking of different finance companies, Blackstone was in the news this week as being one of the first $1 trillion private equity manager. Which is an incredible feat. Blackstone was started by two guys in 1985, and they were overseeing $400,000 in investments. And so I bring that up because the name of the episode is Point 27, and Blackstone came out this week. They said they hired 167 analysts for this round of hiring for them out of more than 60,000 applications. So more than 60,000 qualified people applying for 167 basically positions is just crazy to me. And you look at, I was Googling what are your chances of getting into Harvard? 4%. Yale, 5%, Stanford, 4%, whatever it is. That's qualified people, right? So that's 100 qualified people to get in and 4 get in. It's basically a lottery system. And so I think about this in terms of, I've taught a lot of really good students, a lot of really smart people. And one of the things that always kind of makes me sad is you have younger people that want to go work for these firms and they just don't realize how many other people want to do it. And sometimes it kills their dream for wanting to be in the finance profession or whatever the profession might be that looks like this is the best firm for whatever their field is. And so I just got to be honest, there's zero chance that I would have been hired by one of these companies coming out of college. Like zero chance. Now, I'm an optimist, so I probably would have thought there would have been, but there's absolutely no way that I probably would have even gotten an interview. Number one, I had an engineering degree, so take that I wouldn't even have gotten the interview. I mean, I picked the wrong degree starting out. And so I thought this would be a great lesson in sometimes you got to create your own path. And, there are a ton of different ways to get into a business, to start your own business, to get into the career path that you want. But when you hear these kind of statistics, it's easy for somebody to think, man, there's no way I can do that. There's no way I can ever be out on my own. There's no way that I'm ever going to have any kind of career here. And that's simply not true. Everybody's path is different. If being in a certain career is important to you, you will figure out a way to get into it. So, sometimes not taking the more traditional method is actually more beneficial because you just kind of have the benefit of being naive and not realizing what you're doing. But even so for me, I remember writing to a guy when I was 24 years old and said, hey, I saw your name. I'm interested in this business. I'd love to come work for you. Is there something that you have available that I could do? And at the time, this guy he was working for another company. I just didn't realize it at the time. And so he gives my name. It turns out it's an insurance business. I start working there. I realize I do not enjoy insurance, but at least I got into kind of the world, right? So I did insurance, I did banking, and I'm trying to figure out how to go out on my own. And so, it's easy to get discouraged, but there are paths available. I find this kind of interesting because when you read about the great investment firms that are out there, right, or the ones that are perceived to be the ones that we know as, kind of in the public sphere, the Blackstones, the Merrill Lynch, or Charles Schwab, or Edward Jones, or maybe some of the others, Goldman Sachs, all these, J.P. Morgan. Some of those, just like Blackstone, were two guys working together. Hey, we think there's an opportunity here, and we're gonna go out on our own and try to figure it out. And now they're these massive firms. One of the executives for Blackstone made $1.26 billion with a billion dollars last year. And that company started from just two people working together. And now Blackstone is the largest landlord in the country. When you think about having over $1 trillion and you have to invest that somewhere, you're pretty much invested in every single corner available. And so not only that, they have private equity, they have real estate, they have just everything. I mean, they're just in all corners. And so, of course, if you're a young analyst, young finance person, you see their name, you want to work there. But there are other paths that are very, very profitable and can provide a lot of meaning to you. And so when I see this, I think about all the students I've had over the years that they apply to some job, they don't get it, they get discouraged. And really, you just got to learn to shake this off and really to create your own path. And I know I'm using the example here for the investment world, the finance world, but it's true with whatever's out there. I mean, if it's a construction company or whatever the business is, and that is why entrepreneurship is such an important thing. It's such an important part of our society. There are companies being started today that we don't even know their names that are going to be so important to the world in 10 to 15 years, especially with AI and all of that. So, you got to take these things with a grain of salt. And of course, as these companies get bigger, they got to figure out a way. I mean, how do you comb through 60,000 resumes? Right? Does a computer do it for you at first? I mean, what are we looking for here? There's got to be a way to comb it down. And then as companies get bigger, they want to seem more exclusive, more elusive, so they come out with these and say, hey, man, you got to be only 167 out of 60,000, get to work here. And of course, they use that on the people that they hired. And, it happens all the time. Law schools, they're not law schools, but law practices, accounting firms, everybody. It's this whole thing. Right. And so then you work there 80 to 90 hours a week. They call you vice president. You feel important, but there's like 900 others. Right. So don't be afraid to work your day job while you're working on your dream job at night, creating something for you that nobody else can take away from you. And so if you do that, you'll be happy, and you'll be very proud of yourself later on that you took the chance, bet on yourself, and kind of move forward. So just thought that was a good refresher, good reminder of that. Something that we all need to keep in, just kind of that we all need to keep in the back of our mind. I mean, not everybody's path's the same. So don't worry if yours doesn't look like everybody else's. So big week of earnings coming up. We'll see how the market handles it. And we'll see what the Fed does, and we'll talk about that next week, and we'll see how that's going to impact the market going forward. Whatever the Fed decides this week, I think, the market expects a 25 basis point increase. I mean, that is kind of baked into the market. It's more about the commentary because the Fed does not meet in August. They don't meet again till September. So this is going to kind of, carry a lot of weight with the market over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So we'll see what happens. But again, as always, don't mistake activity for achievement, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.